Well, good afternoon, everybody. Sorry for the delays. We had some technical difficulties getting started, but good to see you all here on this beautiful Thursday afternoon. So we'll give everybody a second to fill the lobby in, and then we will kick this off.
Dude, I love it, Isaac. Like we announced this 48 hours ago. You promote it once, I promote it once, and we've got like 150 people here. I love
Right.
it.
Yeah, we well, and it's funny because with this, one of the things we're talking about here today. I mean, this was just announced. It just came up on my radar, what, Thursday, something like that. So, um, trying to go through, dissect it, understand these 40-page proposals they're talking about is just quite a lot in a short period of time. So, but we can, I think we've got enough people here to where we can go ahead and get started. So, I want to thank everybody for joining us here today for this special last-minute emergency DNC webinar. Joining me today is no stranger to anybody. It's been one of our webinars before, Eric Troutman, founding partner of Troutman Amin LLP, president of REACH, congressional candidate. Um, any other titles we want to throw in there, Eric? Or
I mean, I'm a magazine publisher, so
there you go.
there's that too. I don't know. Yeah, man, I'm wearing a lot of hats right now. I'm busy. I'm not gonna lie to you. And my to-do list keeps getting longer every day instead of shorter. I don't like that. But this was an important one, so I definitely wanted to make sure I made time for it.
Absolutely. So, thank you, Eric, for coming and really just having the idea to have this webinar so quickly, get this information out to everybody. So, really quickly, for those who aren't familiar with contact center compliance, we partner with our compliance to help them comply with the many regulations regarding customer member outreach. It's going to be a big part of what we talk about today, obviously. This includes scrubbing records against state and federal do not call list, number reassignment, but we also have services that help keep your caller IDs clean, and that's going to be part of what we talk about today. I want to draw attention to that today because there are other solutions to helping your calls get delivered, and some people frown upon them. Some people think that they're the best way to go. Um, this isn't necessarily about, hey, you've got to be doing what we say you do, and that's the only right way to go. We want to talk about what the FCC is looking at doing, whether or not it is the right move for the industry and for consumers, and talk about how you can take action, how you can have a voice in what that decision is. So, while again we do play in this space, this is not a great opportunity to just pat ourselves in the back and talk about how we're going to be fine. So we'll get more into that in a little bit. A quick housekeeping note before we do, though, there is a Q&A tab. So please make sure you're posting questions. We'll do everything we can to get to every question before the webinar ends. But if we don't, as long as you signed in with a name or an email address, we'll get to you at the end of this. And finally, just as a reminder, while our guest speaker here is an attorney, he may not necessarily be your attorney, and he's certainly not speaking to give any of his clients on this call direct legal advice. So before you make any changes based on anything we talk about today, please make sure you speak with your compliance team and preferably qualified counsel. If you don't have one, well, I think you'll have one you could talk to at the end of this. So with that, the big thing we wanted to talk about today is the FCC has an open meeting. They do it every month. You can watch it on, I think it's YouTube is technically the platform they use to broadcast it, but you can go to the website. My marketing team will drop a link in the chat. In fact, yeah, they already put that in there. So that is a link to it. You can put it on your calendar. It's at like 7 in the morning if you're out here on the West Coast. It's 10 if you're over in the East Coast, but you can watch the proceedings. You can hear them talk about the things they're thinking about doing and try to kind of get inside of their head for that. So there's two things that we want to talk about that are on there. The first they announced a few weeks ago, so that might be the starting point, and that is potential limitations around offshore or foreign call centers. Um, some of you may have seen blog posts I did. I may have even done a webinar on it, I can't remember, about the Keep Call Center Jobs in America Act in 2025. And that was a bill sponsored by Senator Ruben Gallego of my state of Arizona. There was a senator out in the Carolinas, I want to say, who was the co-sponsor. Hasn't gotten a lot of traction, but I have spoken several times to Senator Gallego's office on it. And I've heard differing reports as to what was behind it. Some of it was job creation, some of it was security of customers, but both were, in my opinion, a little questionable as to whether or not they're going to accomplish those goals. So when this one came out from the FCC, it was very different because from a procedural perspective, it is the FCC talking about doing this, which means a much smaller group of people theoretically to vote and approve it. Whereas when you're talking about a congressional bill, you need a much larger body in two different chambers to vote on it and approve it. So, I found this fascinating. But with this bill, it starts out kind of innocently, and we could put a link to the actual NPRM for the call centers in the chat as well here. But the premise they start out with, and I'm going to read this verbatim for you. Consumers in the U.S. regularly experience frustration and inconsistent outcomes when they connect with a customer service call center located abroad. In addition, there are privacy, data protection, and national security issues unique to call centers located abroad, and bad actors have illicitly accessed customer data or information to advance criminal endeavors. Further, call centers overseas are being used to flood America and our citizens with illegal robocalls, including to carry out financial crimes and victimize customers living here. So painting that broad picture, it sounds like foreign call centers are just absolutely terrible, and they're killing the American economy and American citizens. And Eric, I'm sure you have a lot of clients that have an offshore presence. I mean, is that a fair read based on your experience?
Well, so let's back up. Thank you for all of that, by the way, Isaac. Hi, everybody. Eric Troutman. So we got two NPRMs. We're going to start, as Isaac has teed up, with the offshore NPRM. I just want to orient that this commission now, right, under Chairman Carr, is far more technical, far more in the weeds than what we've seen from past administrations. And as we look at both of these NPRMs, you're going to see a lot more nuance, particularly on the call rotation, number rotation, but even here on the foreign call centers. So you are correct, Isaac. The commission is teeing up foreign call centers as if they are the bane of Americans' existence. And I'm going to tell you, I don't completely disagree with that. I know I'm going to have a lot of people that are going to throw rocks at me. I know it's very common to have offshore BPOs. It's very common to have offshore call centers. Really kind of, everybody operating at scale these days has some offshore presence, either for inbound or outbound. It is a rare breed entity, although I do have a few clients who insist on maintaining only domestic onshore call operations. I get it. It's the way of the world. I gotta tell you, I mean, I pretty much agree with the observations, at least, that the commission has made. Not that offshore call centers are definitively bad or evil, but that many, if not most, of the problems that we have here in America with our telecom system being, abused by robocallers, those problems do arise offshore. And they arise offshore not just from the true scammers, the bad guys, right, that we know are out there, but they also come offshore when domestic companies will use, let's say, a third-party lead generator or, another kind of large-scale third-party call center operation outside of the US without proper oversight. And even if that entity, that American entity, wants to do the right thing in theory, they're a decent company. They're not trying to skirt the law. They're just trying to save a buck, right, by using something offshore. But that lack of oversight, that lack of vetting, right, can lead to the exact problems that the commission is correctly identifying. We do have problems with guys going rogue in Pakistan. We do have problems with data being misused that is properly shared with third parties overseas. And guess what? It gets percolated down. There are bad guy scammers that do get trained up in Indian call centers or Philippine call centers and then use those skills and go off and do nefarious things with them, right? So the observations that the commission is making, I think, again, it's unfair to cast all offshore callers with the same broad brush. Of course, that's not what we're doing. But to say that there isn't a percentage of problems that are arising from offshore calling, that would be completely false. So I applaud, frankly, one, the commission observing, I think correctly, that a lot of our problems are coming from offshore. And then and we'll walk through it. Some of it's a little jingoistic for me, right? You have to speak American Standard English, et cetera, et cetera. But But the idea that, hey, look, we need to take a closer look at what's going on offshore, and if we as American businesses can't assure that our offshore vendors are behaving properly, well, there's going to be consequences, right? To me, that seems directionally to be what the commission is talking about, and I do want to get into specifics, of course. But to the extent that's what the commission is doing, like, I applaud Chairman Carr. I like Chairman Carr, right? He was, I don't know if you guys remember, he's a longtime guy there. He was deep in the weeds during Chairman Pai's era, back in 2015, 2014. I met with him a long time when he was a staffer. I mean, he is a smart guy. I know he's doing some kooky stuff once in a while with like First Amendment stuff that I scratch my head and like, that's not you, Brendan. That's not you. But leave that alone. Here, like he's really in his wheelhouse, and I'm really kind of very interested in some of these proposals. I think that was a little bit long-winded, but hopefully that answers your question.
No, it does. And I think that that's a really good starting point because I think that, when you read the premise as stated, while it is factually accurate, depending on the lens through which you're reading it, you could read it as, okay, yeah, offshore call centers are very bad and just kind of full stop there. Uh, for those of you who don't know me or don't know my background, I've got an extensive history in managing global teams. At my last employer, I had 45,000 agents globally. We were in 13 countries. We did business in 39 languages. So I'm no stranger to foreign labor markets. What I've seen, though, is that there are different approaches that the companies take towards their employment, towards their management of their employees. And I think that's where some of this there needs to be an intersection of these two. A lot of the regulations have been put in place because the industry didn't take the time to police themselves. They didn't set clear standards. That's one of the things that Reach does is Reach define standards for its members to be good actors in the space, with part of the idea being that, hey, if we just clean up our own act, we
Yeah.
might save the government some work of having to create rules. Um, but at the same time, too, I looked through some of this and we could start diving into some of these details. But, one of the things that I say all the time is customer service is dead. And I say that because how rare is it now that you have a truly remarkable customer service experience where you walk away from an interaction where you came in hot and then you ended and you felt like they solved your problem, they valued you as your customer. It doesn't happen that often anymore, at least not in my experience. I'll also say that, the very first thing that is on their list of things that they're concerned with are the proficiency of their spoken English. And they talk about, as Eric mentioned, the American Standard English measurement as what they should be able to do, because they talk about in the order, they need to understand essentially the colloquialisms or vernacular and, accents. And, where we live in a very big country. There's a lot of different accents here. If I go back to Chicago, I'm going to start talking through my nose a lot more, and I'm going to sound much different than I normally do. It can be hard for these foreign labor markets to pick up at times. So, does more effort need to be put into that? I find it funny when I call in and I'll talk to the IVR, I'll hear the IVR, and it's got this very clean, easy to understand voice. And then I speak to an agent, and again, I'm used to working in global environments. I'll have to ask the agent to repeat themselves 2 or 3 times on every sentence because I don't understand it. So we've got the American Standard English, and I don't know if we really need to go into that, but as far as what the definition of that is. But I think language proficiency is a good ask, right?
Yeah, but I don't. So it's good to note this. It's a great talking point. Good for you, Chairman Carr. But that to me that's dead on arrival in the sense that one, it's unenforceable. It's a vague standard. Nobody knows what the hell that means. What level of training is going to be required? How would you possibly enforce that? Right? I mean, that to me is just like a talking point. I don't think. To me, that's a non-serious proposal. Now I could be wrong, but to me, that's a non-serious proposal. The serious proposals in here are, and I'll just read you a sentence. I mean, this one is, to me, this is deadly serious. Quote, we believe it is essential for consumers to know when calls from a provider originate overseas and when calls they make to a provider are answered at a foreign call center. End quote. Now, this is the second time this commission in the last year has brought up this issue, guys. So the future is coming with offshore call centers. It will include that consumers have to be told, they have to be notified. I'm going to go out on a limb right now and make this prediction. This commission is going to make that a requirement. How exactly that's done? Lots and lots of questions around that, and the commission has a lot of questions around that. But to me, they have now taken a firm stance that that is going to happen. Along with that piece, right, that you have to notify the consumer that your call is being answered by a foreign call center or coming from a foreign call center, is the quote, the next quote, paragraph 47. We believe our proposal will empower consumers who wish to transact business or otherwise communicate with a provider via representatives located within the United States to do so. What they are primarily driving at here, it is less. We had this discussion at the Reach meeting, right? We talked about this one at the Reach meeting on Friday, and people were saying it was about job preservation in America, and maybe, right? I mean, I'm not saying no, but what facially what they're really hammering here is consumer empowerment, right? Informing that American consumer that you are going to be dealing with an offshore call center and empowering that American consumer to decide they want to or don't want to continue with that call, and to give them the option to transfer to an American call center. Now, that causes a bunch of really interesting sub issues, right? I mean, somebody at the Reach call was like, well, how long are these consumers going to be willing to wait on the line to get transferred to an American call center when that campaign is not properly staffed and they don't have the skills, right, based training for the people in America to be able to handle that kind of call because that's all outsourced. And then it questions, how can you even structure a rule that's going to work around this and maintain both offshore and onshore presence? So there's a lot of like cascading issues that come from this. But again, and there's other proposals we'll talk through, but if I'm looking at this, right, and doing the thing that Eric Troutman does and tells you, hey, this is what's coming next, I look at this proposal and I tell you, I don't think this American standard English training is going to happen. I do think that consumers are going to be empowered to tell you, hey, I don't want to talk to an offshore agent. Like that's coming, right? So we kind of have to wrap our head around that. And then the other piece that is very interesting to me, that we see in this NPRM is volume limits, right? The proposal that an onshore company, a domestic company, can only do a certain percentage of either their onshore or either their inbound or outbound calling using, right, these foreign call centers. So, well, I always like to pick on Wells Fargo, right? Let's say you're Wells Fargo Bank and you use, a company out in the Philippines to field your inbound calls regarding questions about a bank account, right? Well, obviously there's going to be issues if they do that because the commission's afraid of personal identifying banking information being shared in the Philippines. Leave that alone. We're talking about percentages, right? Maybe the commission says, hey, look, Wells Fargo, you can now only do 50% of your consumer inbound calls in the Philippines. The rest have to be onshore. Maybe it's 25%, maybe it's 75%, right? And so the commission is looking for answers to this. One, right, should we impose limits? Two, if we impose limits, should it be for inbound calls or outbound calls or both? Three, if we impose limits, should it be for marketing? Should it be for servicing? Should it be for debt collection? Should it be for customer service, right? The good news around limits is that unlike, notification that I tell you I think is coming, the commission seems much less clear on, should we have limits? Should we not have limits? We're not really sure what to do here. They seem to be legitimately interested to hear from people. Like, what do y'all think, right? Are there
Yes.
legitimate reasons why you wouldn't want to have a limit on certain segments of calls? Maybe certain segments of calls you would want to limit, right? Does it matter inbound, outbound, right? Like the commission really seems to want to hear from people on that. They're willing to hear from people on the other issue, but I'm telling you, that one just looks baked to me. So, what do you think?
Well, so I think, as far as the American Standard English proficiencies, I think there's two different areas where this could get interesting. If you read the start of the NPRM, and again, this is a draft NPRM, this has not officially gone out for comments, so there's a possibility that before this goes out for comments, that this changes substantially. So please keep that in mind. They talk about initially just applying this to anybody who services broadband or
Right.
long distance or anybody that's in the communication space. That's definitely seems to be their bigger target in the get-go. But then later on, they talk about we're also considering should we try to apply this to anybody who's covered by the TCPA or governed by the TCPA. So there are definitely two different levels that they are looking at here. But as Eric said, they definitely have a lot in this document where they are saying What do you think about this? What do you think we should do here? In fact, half of this document is them either questioning, do we have the legal authority to do some of these things? And a lot of it is, what would be an alternative? When they talk about wait right to transfer, that's actually funny because when we were going through the NPRM that Reach filed comments on just a couple months ago, the one that went over the holidays, there was a very similar thing about taking away the ability to have those calls in foreign call centers, and there were things like that. And I would talk to my friends that are in the space, especially in the inbound space, and they'd say, okay, yeah, if they want to talk to someone in the U.S., I'll transfer them to someone in the U.S. Their wait time is going to be 45 minutes, but I'll meet the standard. They do talk about in this draft NPRM having a standard of the expectation the customer will have the same wait time to talk to someone in the U.S. as they had on the initial leg. So it's not like you could use that and say, hey, you could talk to somebody in 5 seconds in Manila or 5 hours in Cincinnati. It's not going to play like that. At least that's not what they're looking at. And a lot of this too, and this is similar to some of the stuff I got from Senator Galleco's office with his bill, was there is an emphasis on job creation in the U.S. And one of the things that I push back on with, and again, I love it. I love Arizona. I live in Arizona, but I pushed back in the senator's office. I said, okay, if somebody's going to pull jobs out of India or El Salvador or the Philippines or whatever and bring them here to the U.S., Arizona is probably not going to be top of the list because our minimum wage is, around $15 an hour. They're probably going to be looking at Louisiana or Illinois or a state with the federal the federal minimum wage level of $7.25 or $7.50, just because it really cuts into your overhead when you're paying an agent $15 to $20 an hour, depending on your minimum wage. So I think it will be interesting to see where it goes there and what they want. But I do agree there is definitely a lot of room or a lot of ask from the commission on what are the alternatives, but also what are the impacts. And I think for those of you where you've got the wheels spinning in your head and you're like, I need to comment, I need to get involved, numbers are going to be incredibly important. People that are there in the field right now, I guarantee you Reach is going to comment on this. If you want to be a part of that process, come to the table, bring some numbers, show not an inflated number, but a very real calculation of, hey, here's how this will impact us financially. That's how that'll trickle down to the businesses we serve. That's how it'll trickle down to the consumers that are buying those products. Here's the net negative on the U.S. economy. There you go. Join Reach. I mean, how many times have I said on this call already, oh, Reach is doing this, or oh, Reach just did that, or Reach is going to do that. If you want to be part of the change, you got to be part of the group that's changing it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. If you guys have thoughts on any of this, and let me just circle back real quick, right? So to me, when you talk about jurisdiction, what can the commission do? What can the commission not do? Right? This is why I'm so confident that this like training in English is it's kind of funny, but it's not going to happen. The reason is the FCC has no vehicle, has no jurisdiction to regulate consumer experience, right? Like that's not something it can do. It's just completely pie in the sky. What it can do, right, is dictate what originating carriers KYC looks like and their requirements under the robocall mitigation database to report offshore carrier usage. What it can do is have SIP provider notifications that will identify source of phone number, right? It can require its regulated carriers to have a handset notification to an end user that this call came from offshore, right? All of that is in the commission's power. It is within its jurisdiction, right? So I look at some of the stuff and I'm like, good job, good talking point, nice job. Go play some politics. But realistically, that's not going to come to fruition. Realistically, notifications to consumers and empowering consumers to press 9, we see that. We've seen the commission do that before. So we know that they know how to do that. This is a playbook that they played and they can use. Now, remember, in the previous NPRM, again, this is the second time the commission is coming to us on this issue because they are deadly serious on this. Remember, last time, though, Reach's position aligned with the CTIA, it aligned with the U.S. Telecom, which is maybe there's a way to do this, but we're not there yet. We don't have the record built out. The commission said, okay, we heard you. Go give me my record, right? So this could actually be looked at as a follow-on to the if you can imagine, like the school teacher that got the essays and is reading the essays just going, no, you guys missed the assignment completely. So let me make it more clear to you, right? you are going to be dealing with this. So please come to me now with something useful, or I'll do it for you, right? So this is now our opportunity, a second time. I think the first time the commission probably thought it was too subtle. All right, it's not being subtle this time, right? So again, particularly around notification to consumers on offshore call usage, the empowerment to transfer. If there are issues with that, and we all know there are, right? We need to come forward and tell the commission that. Not whine, not complain, not say don't do it, but with facts and data, like Isaac was just saying, right? And again, if you've got some of that information and you are not yet a Reach member, well, either join Reach or you can submit your own comment. Anybody here is allowed to submit a comment. You don't have to go through a trade organization, but the commission, frankly, does prefer that. I was surprised. I remember when you had the chief of enforcement at the
Yeah.
summit in
Hmm.
Florida, and somebody asked that question, and I was like, "Oh, what a great question!" Because I assumed he would say, "Yeah, no, come forward in your own voice." That's actually not what he said. What he said was, "Yeah, you might want to work with your trade organization on that." And I thought, "Wow, well, look at that, right?" So do work with a trade organization. If it's not Reach, there's other organizations out there. None, frankly, in my opinion, as active or as on top of this stuff as we are. But there's others. But either way, no matter what, right? If this stuff is going to impact you, you should get involved, right? Sitting on the sidelines and hoping it all works out. How's that going for you? Right? Come and
Right.
get involved. All right. Anything else on that one?
No, I think that was, pretty much it. So what I'd like to do, because I want to move into the number rotation. So there's
Yeah.
just, a few things that they want people to think about. And again, I can't stress this enough. And I love the tone of this NPRM simply because every single time they say we're thinking about doing this, it's followed up either immediately or somewhere else in the document with, if that's not the right solution, then what is? So, some of the things that they're interested in talking about or they're looking at are things that I haven't seen before, like, are there certain trade restrictions that should be put in place? So if we see that, just great example, I had a colleague years ago, he's from India, he was here visiting me in the US, and I said, hey, we're both in the call center space. I get all these social security scam calls are clearly coming from India. Do people there just have that little understanding of U.S. law to where they think that they're making valid calls and they're just, patsies in this crime? They don't know anything about it. And he says, oh no, they know exactly what they're doing. They know it's illegal. And I say, well, then why did they do that? He goes, well, it pays a lot better than the legal call centers, and the government doesn't care. So, hearing that and understanding that is what we're up against, that really paints it in a different picture. And that's, one of the proposals that I saw in there was, I think the term they used was an adversarial nation. Should we say that we don't set these up in an adversarial nation? A lot of people see us as having a trade war right now with China as an example, and, a lot of bad actor attacks coming from China. So should we, as a result, not allow call center work to be done there? So I think it's an interesting proposal, and I know there's a lot of countries like the Philippines that heavily depend on the revenue from these jobs. So if there were a way that the governments could work together for better enforcement, where there's a carrot and a stick, maybe that's the solution. That's just one idea off the top of my head. But I think everything needs to be considered, everything needs to be suggested. But just, as Eric said a few minutes ago, don't do it from the perspective, oh no, that's dumb, and then just leave it there. Offer an alternative because they are genuinely trying to fix a problem here. And just hearing, I don't like it, isn't going to help anybody.
Yeah, I think what we've seen from this administration now is they're not going to hear offshore call centers on a problem. You're not going to sell them on
Right.
that. Okay. You can sell them on, they're not as big a problem as you think they are. You can sell them on, they solve even bigger problems and therefore they're good for American consumers, right? Like there are counter narratives that can be presented, but it will not be helpful for anyone to be like, you're just wrong, guys. Foreign call centers are great, get out of here. Um, but what I well, anyway, I don't want to spend too much time on this because the other one might even be beefier or more interesting.
Yes.
Do people have questions though? I'm wondering if we can answer a couple of questions on this one before we jump into the other one. I'm not sure we've got Q&A enabled or not.
Yeah, we do. I haven't seen any questions come in on this one yet.
Okay.
I think that there's, there might be some opportunity where you could say, well, I don't know if this applies to me because I'm in lead gen. Well, that depends on what aspect of this passes, because if you're covered by the TCPA, then, that you could very well be involved with this versus a company that's doing customer service efforts. So there is a little bit of both. I think the next one is going to touch a little bit closer to home. So let's shift gears and talk about that. So as part of the work I did with Reach, I was a member of an FCC oversight committee. The North American Numbering Plan has a working group that oversees, just kind of the administration of it. We give insight. The FCC may say, hey, we're looking into this. We're considering that. They ask the group to do a study and give feedback, and we'll do that. All those oversight groups were disbanded last year. So that's why I don't do it anymore. But the last charge we got from the FCC was questions around eliminating access to phone numbers from certain phone companies and pulling back that access. And the rationale behind it was because there were a lot of states, like Maine is a great example. Maine has one area code. They want to keep it that way, and they'll have this little town where like 45 people live, and for some reason there are 20,000 phone numbers assigned for that one little town. And they have a hard time with phone numbers being finite resources. They have a hard time keeping phone numbers available for the people that actually live in that state. So the carriers, the FCC, have been seeing overuse and misuse of phone numbers being assigned and pulled out of inventory. But on the other side, you've got a lot of call centers that are using it. Let's talk about just ones using it for legitimate purposes. They're using it, one, because studies have shown that if you call someone using a localized caller ID, you get a better answer rate. I don't know if that still applies today, but the last study I saw was about 10 years ago, and it still showed that. The other aspect of it is there is this horrible problem with phone numbers getting labeled as spam, and it is an act of God to get that resolved. So some companies will enroll in a remediation service like the one offered by Contact Center Compliance. Others will say, you know what, I'm just going to do number rotation to try to avoid getting mislabeled as spam. They're not doing it to evade detection necessarily. There are people that do, but they're not these. I'm not talking about those people right now. I'm talking about people that are just saying, hey, I want to try to play within the limits to where I can make legal calls that have been requested by a market or that I have the right to market to, people not on the do not call list. But I can't because every phone call I make gets labeled as spam. The FCC is talking about rolling quite a bit of that back. So, just as kind of a starting point, they stated, and I'm quoting again, evaluate whether to adopt changes to the numbering policies with respect to how assigned numbering resources are utilized, reported, and resold by service providers as part of a continuing effort to combat illegal robocalls. And notice in this part of it here, they say illegal, not unwanted or spam, and that is a key difference. But that is what they're trying to get to. Number rotation as a principle, what are your thoughts on that, Eric? I know you've got some strong thoughts about blocking and labeling.
Yeah, well, let's put it all together in a package real quick, right? Because what the commission is ultimately trying to do, right, is stop unwanted robocalls, illegal robocalls, right? As you correctly said, that's what they're trying to do, all right? The commission does not intuitively understand number rotation or carouseling. What they recognize, right, from their vantage point is we've got a plan where only providers who can make use of phone numbers in 60 days and are licensed to provide communication services in a jurisdiction are allowed to have direct access to phone numbers, right? That's been on the books forever, right? That's the North American Numbering Plan that we're all familiar with. They're looking at this and they're like, wait a second. How come these guys have to jump through a bunch of hoops to get the numbers, but then they can sell those numbers to resellers who can then sell those numbers again, who then can sell it to somebody else who's using it for a campaign or a provider. And there's no oversight there at all, right? So this is the commission sitting back and going, wait a second. Like, why is that, right? And it's an interesting question, but it is kind of the world that we have lived in, right? The telecom world we live in today is when you go to, as a call center, and some of you might be wondering what we're, just to be absolutely clear, we're talking about a call center has DIDs, direct inward dial numbers that are assigned to them for campaigns that come from their carrier. But we're talking about their carrier here. We're not necessarily talking about, an end carrier like Verizon, T-Mobile, or somebody else. We're talking about whoever their VoIP service provider is. We're talking about whoever their aggregator is, whoever their even sometimes a CPaaS is, right? The person that they're directly interfacing with is going to provide them that phone number. Great. But guess what? They might have got it from somebody else, who got it from somebody else, who got it from somebody else. So what the commission has found, particularly with this Avid Telecom situation not long ago, is that the sale of these DIDs downstream is making it tougher for the ITG, the Industry Traceback Group, and others to do their job of identifying where phone numbers are coming from in the first instance, or illegal calls are coming from in the first instance. Now, I'm not entirely sure I agree with that. That's a little bit of a bait and switch, right? Like it's true that there's not a lot of visibility in terms of where numbers are going from when they're first provisioned to where they end up. But I'm not sure that that actually aligns with the difficulty ITG has going from hop to hop to hop to find the person that's actually making the call, because that's just like an originating versus terminating carrier issue as opposed to where the number come from issue, right? So they're kind of not the same thing, and the commission's looking at the two and suggesting there's some kind of alignment where there's not. But through that, like squinty, is there alignment between not being able to find where the phone number came from, not being able to find the robocaller? Then on top of that, you put in this carouseling thing, right? And it looks to the commission like, well, if you're a legitimate company, why would you be constantly switching your phone number? You must be trying to trick the consumer. Now, here the commission actually does pause and say, we get it, right? And again, none of this is intuitive to these guys. Like you could see in some portions, if we talk about, they're talking about collapsing number sales to a single tier, for instance, and like they're very comfortable talking about these issues. But when you're talking about the number carouseling, they proceed very cautiously. I'm going to read you some of the questions here in a second, because you can tell they're not entirely sure what this phenomenon is, how often it's being deployed, or exactly what it means, right? But we all know what it means. What it means is that the damn carriers are blocking our calls and labeling people that are completely legitimate calls, labeling them as spam and scam, which is a complete defamation, right? That's libel. They shouldn't be allowed to do it, and they keep doing it. So my beloved friends out there, who I tell you, you should sue these guys and not let them get away with it. Of course, it's too expensive to do that, and it's such a pain. So what do you do instead? What you do instead is you just buy a large block of numbers, right? And once one gets burned, you move to the next one. When that gets burned, you move to the next one. Should you have to do that? No, that's insane, right? But when the carriers are going to be mislabeling and consumers aren't going to trust unless this call comes through on a clean number, unless you want to pay for branded caller ID, which is a whole different thing that we'll talk about here in a second, like what options do you have, right? You have to go to carouseling. And so I hate it personally. I hate it, but it's not a problem in and of itself. It is a symptom of the problem. The actual problem is the carriers mislabeling and blocking. And of course, Reach has its petition out there that's been pending now for a year, where we asked the commission, because we do good work for the industry. You're welcome, hopefully, if it gets granted. We asked the commission to clarify carriers cannot block calls on the basis of content. They cannot block legal consented calls. They cannot label a legal consented call a spam or scam, right? Like these are the most basic common sense, right? Rules that you'd want to see for a healthy telecom environment. Like how can you give the carriers power to block or label calls and not give them that basic guide rail? By the way, only illegal calls can be scammed or spammed or blocked, right? The commission has never done that. And the result of that huge, glaring, basic, low-hanging fruit is until somebody sues, which nobody wants to do, we just rotate our phone numbers. And that's leading to one real problem, which is phone number exhaustion, right? There are
Right.
only so many phone numbers out there in the world, guys, right? I mean, you got it's 10 digits, so it's like 1 billion, I don't know, 10 billion numbers. You guys tell me, you're good at math, not me. There's a limited number of numbers. It's a large number, but when you're talking about a population the size of America and North America, and we're talking about the number of phone numbers that now need to be provisioned for a large scale campaign to cycle through, we're burning them up, right? So rather than what I would say is, you should look at the cause of the problem and stop the mislabeling, stop the blocking, solve the problem. They're looking at the symptom, right? And they're saying, well, we're going to stop call rotation. Although, again, here they're really looking for input. And that was a long answer, so I'll let you jump back in. But then we'll read some of the questions that they're actually asking on this, which are pretty interesting.
Yeah, and see that's where, it really does become an issue of what happens if this doesn't get better because when the 10-digit numbering was put into place, most homes had a phone number assigned to them and that was about it. You'd have businesses that had a handful of numbers, but now you go to a home and there's a home phone that's hooked up to the alarm system that nobody even knows is still there. You've got 5 cell phone numbers. Your 3 cars have phone numbers tied to them. Your refrigerator has a phone number tied to them. I mean, phone numbers have gotten tied to so many devices right now that there's a lot more assignment as there is. And there were discussions about moving to a 14-digit numbering plan. I don't know if anybody still remembers phone numbers today, but imagine going from having to remember a 10-digit number to a 14-digit number. That's going to be a lot of fun. But huge infrastructure changes would have to go in place to even support that kind of a move. With the number rotation specifically, I think it's interesting because they talked about a couple of different avenues or a couple of different types of number rotation. They see some where people are making one call from a phone number and then never using it again. They're talking about people that are seeing that they're getting blocked or they're mislabeled. They feel they're mislabeled, so they're trying to avoid it. They talk about yet another classification of people who are doing it and just trying to see if they think they'll get labeled, and if they do, then they change their phone number. So I think that they're identifying that there are different use cases and different reasons somebody might have to rotate those phone numbers. So I think that if they were to put something in place on this, they would be looking for some sort of reasonable explanation as to why you would need to change your phone number on each dial. It's definitely something to consider and to be aware of. If we want to take a break and talk about some of the questions that are coming in here, we've got one that says, our own Tammy Glover Fowler did point out that they're talking about, in that premise, they're talking about using this to fight robocalls. There's nothing in the limits that have been suggested that would apply only to robocalls. So I think that's very important to keep in mind because a robocall being a pre-recorded call is one thing, but just your typical live agent call center operations would absolutely be affected as a part of this. Why can't the FTC verify and register each number to the originating call center to help eliminate spam and identify bad actors? Then only allow those numbers to be active. Carriers currently arbitrarily block or allow traffic to go through their network. When they then they charge you for access. Why is this legal? I've been saying this similar thing for a long time. I've been saying this same thing or something similar for a long time. Where I think that there are certainly avenues to look at from an origination perspective. One of the ways that with spam emails that many providers cut back on it is they used a technology called DNS. It's where you look up information on the internet to figure out where servers are. And there's certain servers you register that you say, hey, this server, this address is authorized to send phone number or emails on behalf of my domain. And it's not bulletproof, but it definitely has helped cut back on a lot of spam. I personally think that there are similar technologies that could be looked at with this. The problem I have seen so far when I go to conferences in DC where they're talking about these types of issues, it's usually somebody's trying to sell a solution that they've built rather than talking about how we can focus on an open standard that anybody could adapt to. Do you have any thoughts on that, registration proposal?
No, not really. What I do have thoughts on though, is branded caller ID, right? Which is, so a bunch of people have reached out to me and they've said this whole thing, this whole, number rotation NPRM is like, the branded caller ID people have gotten to the FCC, right? And
Right.
like, there's big money in this. And the carriers now all have deployed their own, analytics engines and branded caller ID solutions, and they don't want to lose that revenue stream. And now the FCC is cooking something up with them. I don't know. I mean, like I've heard that enough times in the last like few days that it's kind of starting to sink in is like that's what's going on. But I can't. There's no reason for me to believe that. But what is true is that if this NPRM goes forward the way that it does, and there is no concomitant dealing with the carrier blocking and mislabeling, and you can't do number rotation anymore, well, what can you do other than caller ID, branded caller ID, right? And when you align that with the previous discussion on switching over to RCD, which they talked about in the last NPRM, you start to wonder if we're moving into a future state where the commission really does just want to see people, if you want, it's pay to play. If you want to make outbound phone calls at scale in the United States of America, now you've got to pay basically to put your logo on that call, and otherwise, you're just going to get burned, or it basically there's two classes of people, right? People who pay for caller ID and scammers, right?
Right.
Like we might be getting to a future state where that is where we're at. If that offends you, and frankly, I don't know, should the phone system be free or should it be tiered? I assume it should be free because I always lived in a world where it was, well, free is the wrong word, but relatively inexpensive. Or should it be a toll road that we have to, pay to drive on? I mean, I guess this is a policy issue. I know where I land on this. I think this is all baloney, and the carriers should knock it off. And the First Amendment says what it says. But if you've got opinions and views on this, again, Reach will be putting together a comment on this issue. And there's some questions here that the commission has asked, and I think it's just worth kind of listening to some of these, right? We seek information on how frequently number cycling is used for illegal robocalling campaigns. How frequently is it used for legal campaigns? How frequently is it used to avoid legitimate calls being incorrectly tagged as illegal calls? To what extent is short-term provisional use of numbers associated with number cycling used for good versus illegal campaigns, right? They want to know, like, how is this really being used in the wild, in the field, right? And so to the extent that we can come in there and we can help them out, and for instance, another question is, if we were to develop rules prohibiting number cycling, how should it be defined? Particularly if we also want to avoid barring number cycling that is not part of illegal robocall campaigns. What parameters should exist, right? So they're asking us, to Tammy's point, to everybody's point, if we don't want to have number cycling blocked because we have to be able to avoid this illegal carrier behavior, what should the guide rails be, right? When should it be okay to recycle or to cycle through numbers? When should it not be okay, right? So we're going to have to come up with some very thoughtful points here. And again, having data and having stats is going to be very important.
So I do want to touch back on branded calling because that is another service that we provide here. And with branded calling, it's interesting because 2 years ago I would have said, yeah, branded calling definitely it's pay to play, and if you pay for branded calling, you're not going to get labeled. It sucks because the same company who's deciding to label you as a spammer is also the same company that you're paying to put your caller ID on, so they're double dipping.
Crazy.
But we have seen a trend lately where we have with some of our customers on a certain carrier, they still don't even want to brand their calls. And it's interesting because it's a reputable company, a well-known company. They advertise on TV, the whole nine yards. This isn't some fly-by-night company. They're not even a third party representing the brand. But they have just decided that they want to make their traffic spammy because, maybe they have called a customer more than 3 times in a day, or maybe they have tried to call the same person for more than 2 weeks or something like that. And these are existing customers they're trying to connect with for collection efforts or to follow up on a prior response. But just the unilateral decision has been, nope, that consumer doesn't want it. I started out earlier by pointing out the fact that it talks about illegal versus unwanted. And that's key here, too, because when we'll have these conversations for our customers that are under remediation, and we'll say to the analytics engines that are spamming them, hey, here is all the legal information you need. Here are the consent records. Here's where they last interacted with the brand. Here's all the stuff proving that there is a relationship here, and these are legal calls. And every time the analytics engines reminds me, we don't care whether or not the calls are illegal or legal. We're letting them go through. We're letting the consumer make the decision. We're just putting a spam label on it because we're pretty sure that consumer doesn't want it. And I think that's really unfair. For the new branded calling that was addressed in the last NPRM, as of right now, there are 2 separate branded caller IDs in the BCID environment. There is the one that the CTIA is pushing that Verizon and T-Mobile have gotten on board with. AT&T has not gotten on board. They're using something else entirely. So there's not even a uniform system for that. However, I have heard early feedback that those using the new branded calling are not getting that get out of jail free card on the spam label. So it's definitely not going to open up that toll road.
Interesting.
Now there is, and this does tie into a comment that was put on here. So I'm going to read this comment or a comment question. But hi, I'm in telecom, serving retail customers. The loudest complaint that they receive is robocalls of any type. So to meet their needs, they deploy reputation blocking services. And essentially, what this person talks about is that they see number rotation being the hardest thing for them to put proper blocking and labeling on because since legal actors and illegal actors alike are rotating their phone numbers to avoid the labeling, they don't have enough historical reputation on any one phone number to say this is a good guy and this is a bad guy. This is why, anybody that's been coming to our conferences or webinars have noticed that we went from saying in like 2022-ish, 2023, we're saying no more than 80 calls per phone number a day to make as many calls as you can with the same phone number. And that's because that was the feedback we're getting from the carriers. They're saying, hey, before it was nobody needs to make more than 80 calls in a day. So if you do that, you're a spammer. So that's why we put those limits out. They changed the way they measured things. They said, well, actually, we'd like to see a good use history on the same phone number. So we started encouraging that. The problem is that the customers of ours are then putting all of their eggs into one basket. So if they have a misstep, if they go through a period of time where they get bad consumer feedback, if a bad actor spoofs their phone number and generates some bad traffic and gets a lot of spam reports, that shuts down the entire caller ID inventory. So, there is a lot more depth to this than just these onesie twosie answers. So I think that, a lot of thought needs to be put into any sort of solution before rotation would be kicked to the road.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it, it's like rotation shouldn't be used as an identifier to determine who the good guys are and the bad guys are because both use it, right? But I do see why it can be difficult if the bad guys are rotating and you're going to treat rotation as neutral, right? Well, how do you determine which phone numbers now to block, which ones belong to the bad guy? Because the bad guy is using the same tactics that the good guy is using. Again, what does this teach us, right? This teaches us that we should fix the problem. Because if the carrier stopped treating the good guys and the bad guys the same way, then the good guys and the bad guys wouldn't operate the same way anymore, right? The good guys would just go right on being good guys, and the bad guys would reveal themselves because they have to do number rotation. But because we've got this environment where it doesn't matter if you're a good legal caller making consented calls to hand raisers or if you're a bad guy scammer, the carriers treat you the same way. This is the world that we live in, right? So to me, we gotta solve. I mean, but this is just how I am about life, right? I don't treat symptoms, man. I treat the disease. That's why I'm running for Congress. Like, I want to get the Constitution to work. Forget everything else. Let's get the Constitution to work first. Everything else is a symptom, right? That comes from that problem. And it's the same thing here, man. We got to get the carriers to knock off their behavior. Then everything else will fall into place. We'll have a much healthier ecosystem.
So we've got about 4 minutes left. So I want to leave some closing thoughts here. Taking my perspective on both of the items that were discussed here, I think when it comes to anybody that's involved with offshore call centers or foreign labor markets, I think it's a good opportunity or good reminder for you to be taking a closer look at your hiring and screening processes. Are you hiring employees that adequately service your customers and fit the need that you're trying to do and represent your brand in a way that, is really reflective of your brand versus just hiring anybody that comes in through your front door? And the same thing could be said for your call centers here in the US. Everything I'm about to say actually could be said for the same thing. Your security practices. Are you clicking all the right ticks in the PCI forms, or are you actually doing the audits? Are you actually following the rules? Are you actually enforcing the policies? Whether you're foreign or local is irrelevant. I've seen the same type of fraud happen in the US that I've seen happen in foreign call centers. Are you being a responsible actor? That's the key to it for me on that one. So evaluate some of those things and obviously be a part of the voice in this, but make sure that you are doing your own due diligence in your hiring and management practices. When it comes to caller ID rotation, I will just come out and say, I'm not a fan of it. Do I think it should be illegal? No. I don't think that it is a customer-friendly approach, and this is just my personal opinion, but I do understand that there is an issue with a lot of blocking and labeling that is out there, so I get that people are trying to find ways around it, and I don't want to demonize it. What I would say is that with our remediation solution, we are able to monitor your phone numbers. We have a very high success rate of cleaning those phone numbers, provided you will play by the rules. And we find a lot of times that is the bigger value of our product, is the consultative approach, to where we look at not just whether or not you're being labeled as spam, but why you're being labeled as spam, and help guide you towards that. We've identified everything from bugs in people's lead gen situations where they're creating duplicate leads and calling people 6 times a day instead of 3. We've seen people who weren't aware that they need to check for number reassignment and gotten them set up with checking for number reassignment on a very regular basis. Do not call the whole 9 yards. So make sure that you have taken a close look at your dialing strategies. Do you have all the regulatory compliance in place? Do you have the carrier best practices in place? If you do, there's a much lesser chance you're going to need to rotate your numbers, as long as you have somebody helping you monitor your health and monitoring your dialing practices. And then my final takeaway before I hand it to Eric for his is, be a part of the change. Be a voice in the comments. If you're not a part of Reach, I highly recommend you get involved. We at CCC are big sponsors of Reach. We believe in the work that is being done there, and we think that every group, being part of a much larger voice will go a lot longer in Washington. Eric,
Yeah,
closing thoughts?
I appreciate it. Look, so NPRM, one, on the offshore NPRMs, get ready, right, for a future world where consumers have to be notified in some form or fashion if they're calling an offshore call center or they're receiving a call from an offshore call center. Get ready for a future world where they get to key punch and move to a domestic, right? Get ready. Like, it's coming. Like, just wrap your head around it. Is it going to be this year? Probably not. But in the next 3 years, I'm going to tell you, this is approaching a certainty in my mind that will be the future state. Everything else, you're going to have a lot of play, right? If you get involved and help us, we can talk through limits or lack of limits. We can talk through training or lack of training. We can talk through other elements of that NPRM. But just understand, I think that we're going to be baked in a world where consumers are going to be informed of foreign call center operations. One, two, moving over to the caller ID, the caller rotation piece. Obviously, Reach is going to use this as a vehicle to get change. I mean, how many times have I told you the problem is not number rotation, whether it's good, bad, that's not the problem, right? That is a symptom. The problem is the carrier behavior. We're going to use this to go back to the commission and seek action on our petition. Expect us to have meetings with the commission here in the next 30 to 60 days. If you want to be part of that, come join Reach. We can get it done. There are other very important pieces of that NPRM that we have not focused on as much. Again, collapsing the resale of numbers provisioned
Yes.
right to a single tier could have massive implications on call centers who are trying to get numbers provisioned to make outbound calls. It could become a lot harder for you to get phone numbers, right? So you've really got to start thinking about a place where, one, caller rotation might become illegal, but even if it remains legal, getting enough numbers to engage in caller rotation, number rotation, might become a huge challenge, right? So more so than ever before, the carrier treatment of your phone numbers and your own reputation out there is critically important to manage. Do with that as you see fit, right? I'm just a humble attorney. What do I know? But I love all of you. Thanks so much for being out here, guys.
All right. Well, we hope to see you guys at some of the shows we're going to be at. I know, Eric, you're going to be at Medicarians, right?
We got Medicare and LeadsCon. I haven't even mentioned Law
LeadsCon?
Conference of Champions this
We
entire
got law
time.
conferences. Yeah, well, you're slipping.
I didn't mention Elcock. You guys all have to come May 4th through 6th, Irvine, California. We're going to have a telecom panel with David Kasem, the CEO of Telnex. We're going to have Alex Quilici, the CEO of Umail, on stage talking through these issues, hammering it out. I don't know. It's going to be so much fun. You guys should definitely come. Law Conference of Champions. Go get yourself a ticket.
Reach out if you guys have questions. We'd love to continue this conversation with you all, and we hope to see you guys on the road. Otherwise, have a great day.
Love you all. Bye.